everyone, it's Vanilla. So chances are you and I have never met before, and you clicked on my video because of my amazing title and thumbnail. I'm so flattered. We should probably get straight to the point because I know your time is valuable. I'm not going to be talking about any goated Pokemon classics, but I am going to be talking about a game that managed to surpass the Pokemon Coliseum series and the Mystery Dungeon games in total units sold. Today I'm going to be making a video about everybody's favorite Pokemon game, Pokemon Pinball! You might be wondering why I'm making a video about a game that's this obscure. Normally I'm making videos about ROM hacks or Pokemon MMOs, but my ADHD-addled brain can only take me through the same content over and over for so long. Maybe you clicked on this video and you're like,
"Oh, this is boring. Your title is clickbait. This is definitely not the best Pokemon game of all time. That's definitely..."
And then you'll say whatever Pokemon game you think is best. I hear where you're coming from. I would have been in a similar position as you if I hadn't looked at the reviews for the Pokemon Pinball series. These games were extremely popular and well received when they were released, and I think it's super cool to look at retro games. There's plenty of content covering the same Pokemon games, but I want to talk about something new. Well, maybe new to you and I. Now, some folks who cover retro content can be a bit, how do you say, dry in their delivery. So, if you give me the chance, I'm going to try to make this video really enjoyable to watch, and maybe you'll find that you really like it and it's not what you think it's going to be. So I think a good first step is exploring how I got here. This is like when you look up a recipe on Google, and then you end up hearing the life story of the creator, and then they explain how their great-great-great-great-great-grandma's aunt started cooking during the Great Depression, and then revolutionized sourdough bread recipes. I've always had an interest in retro games and technology. I love watching folks go to secondhand stores and pick up different computer hardware, and then repair and rebuild old PCs. It probably says a lot about me that I can say my favorite keyboard is the IBM Model M from 1986. These pieces of technology were way before my time, like a long time before, but maybe that's part of the draw for me. So I've been exploring Pokemon ROM hacks that are for older games. I made a video on a yellow ROM hack called Pokemon Velvet that added in new quality of life features and Pokemon from different generations. That was a really fun ROM hack, and you should check out that video if you get the chance. Since I like to lurk on the Poke community forums to find updates and new ROM hacks, I stumbled upon a hack for Pokemon Red that was called Pokemon Brown, made by Rainbow devs. See, this is where the ADHD comes in. I went to their website and then I saw that they had made a hack for Pokemon Pinball, and my brain for whatever reason was like, yes, I want to hyperfixate on this game. You will not be playing anything except Pokemon Pinball. And before diving into the Pokemon Pinball games, I feel it's appropriate that I explain my background with pinball tables. I don't have any. But I used to go to the arcade quite a bit, and they typically had a pinball machine or two. But again, pinball tables being all the rage was quite a bit before I was even conceptualized. As far as I understand it, pinball was really popular in the 70s, and then saw a resurgence in the 90s, and it kind of makes sense if you think about it. Pinball tables have themes, usually with cartoon characters, caricatures, or they can be based off of movies. They also had flashing lights, bright colors, and fun sound effects and music, which make playing them an extremely enjoyable experience. Now, how do you convert the fun and engaging experience of pinball to video game form? Well, we need to consider the type of technology that was around when pinball machines were popular. Due to hardware limitations, especially in the 70s, recreating pinball for play at home proved to be a complex task for a while. Atari had a couple of stabs at creating pinball games, and to be quite honest, they're kinda bad. And it's not just because they're old. There are pinball games for the Apple II that came out in the 80s that were relatively cutting edge. They had good ball physics, and the boards were pretty interactive for the time. It's important to keep in mind that at this point, coding something like pinball that has a lot of elements like ball physics and interactive environments was very difficult. But I mean, come on, Atari, like, what is this?
Oh, Vanilla, what does this have to do with the Pokemon Pinball series?
That's an excellent question. Well, at the time the original Pokemon Pinball was released, there weren't many options for handheld pinball titles. There were some games that were just your run-of-the-mill pinball, but the market for a bright and colorful pinball game was wide open. Pokemon Pinball's main competitors were Kirby's Pinball Land and Kirby's Tilt and Tumble. Even though Kirby's original pinball game was released 6 years prior in 1993, it was still able to sell around 2.1 million copies. However, this would only be half of the amount of sales Pokemon Pinball managed at 5.3 million copies sold. Pokemon Pinball was originally released in Japan on April 14, 1999, and then released in North America in June of that same year. The game received quite a few good ratings, with our good friend Craig from IGN giving the game an 8 out of 10, and the Japanese magazine Famitsu gave the game a 32 out of 40. Let me put on my smart spectacles for a second here. I'm so cool that I'm gonna show you guys a copy of Nintendo Power from 1999! Pretty impressive, huh? Yeah. Scott, Eric, Andy, and Henry gave the game a 7.4 out of 10. It was important for me to make sure the reviews were from around the time the game was released. Our Nintendo Power friends give us some insight into what the oracles of gaming knowledge thought in 1999. Scott tells us that it's a pretty good pinball game. I have no experience with any other pinball games, so as of right now, I'm right there with him. Andy delivers a killer one-liner. There's a lot more depth here than the title led me to believe. A man of few words. But both Henry and Eric give us actual usable information. Henry states that he liked the bonus stages and the save feature, and Eric informs us of a potential flaw, the screen scrolling. But we'll get to that later. I just realized I should probably tell you about how the game plays. What if you've never played pinball? This would all be very confusing. In the original Pokemon Pinball, you get to catch all 150 Pokemon split between two pinball boards. There's a red board and a blue board. In order to begin the process of catching Pokemon, you need to shoot your ball through the right loop and light up at least 2 catch 'em arrows on the board. If you light up all 3 arrows, a rare Pokemon may spawn. When catch 'em mode is active, you need to shoot the ball into Bellsprout or Cloyster depending on the board. This will allow a Pokemon to spawn. You need to reveal all of the panels of a Pokemon's portrait by hitting the appropriate obstacles with your ball. These are denoted by an arrow. Then you're able to catch the Pokemon after hitting it enough times with the ball. But not all 150 Pokemon can be caught per se. Some of them need to be evolved, and there's a separate loop for that. After you catch a Pokemon during a play session, your ball needs to go through the loop and then into the evolution cave to enter evolution mode. An evolution item will appear on the board, and its icon will change depending on what Pokemon you're trying to evolve. Keep in mind, you won't be able to get all 150 Pokemon unless you trade. Different Pokemon spawn on different maps. You can see what map you're currently on by looking at the little picture in the center of the board. You can change what map you're on by satisfying certain conditions. Here's a list of some of the conditions for the red board, and it's definitely a lot to remember. But if you manage to satisfy one of the conditions, you can enter the bonus cave in the center of the field, where you're able to move to a different location. The board itself doesn't change except for this little picture in the middle. There are also bonus stages you can enter in order to earn more points. I was able to enter the Meowth and the Diglett bonus stages. I think it was a good change of pace to include these quick mini games. I appreciate that they're just used to rack up points, mainly because I'm not good at activating or completing them. This is something our good friend Henry was discussing earlier. He said he also liked the bonus stages. We have so much in common. Additionally, Henry was also impressed that he was able to save his game. If you're not too familiar with older tech, you may think that this sounds kind of odd, but back in ye old days, it wasn't uncommon for games to not have the ability to save. Today, your save data is stored locally on device storage or in the cloud somewhere. But back around the time when Pokemon Pinball was released, this was not a common feature. Save data was stored on the game cartridge itself. Well, on the PCB anyway. This is the PCB, or printed circuit board. That's found under this nice looking plastic thing. This battery here is what allows the save game to happen. Without getting too technical, the battery powers parts on the board that keep the information in memory. So when you turn the console on and the game boots up, your save data will still be there. These cartridges weren't all too common at this time because they were more expensive to produce, and games that were in an arcade style didn't typically have a save functionality. So Pokemon Pinball was pretty different. Now you'll have something exciting to talk about during the holidays. I've heard retro technology is a great conversation starter. Let's go back to our good friend Eric. What was he talking about when he mentioned screen scrolling? Well, if you've been watching my horrible gameplay, you can most definitely see what he was talking about. When the ball enters or exits the top or bottom half of the board, the screen moves. This is accompanied by a white flash, which occurs between each shift. I'm pretty sensitive to flashing lights and bright lights, so this was really irritating and made the gameplay kind of unenjoyable. And since the screen is constantly swapping back and forth, it's hard to predict where your ball is exactly going to go, which is just another handicap for those of us with no gamer skills. The Z is really important to show how much skill you have. I know it's sad, but we're gonna say goodbye to the Nintendo Power Bros and look at what Craig from IGN has to say. 1999, IGN Craig rated the game an 8. Well, IGN's 8 was defined as, if you play a lot of games, then you have got to play this one. It might not be among the very best available, but it's worth your time. Okay, cool. Craig tells us that one thing is obvious, the design team took the existing pinball engine of Kirby's Pinball Land for the Game Boy and converted it into another machine altogether. I'm not seeing his vision, I'm not gonna lie. Craig doesn't really elaborate, but the two games did share a developer, HAL Laboratories. I don't know if they cloned the physics engine, but the boards and gameplay loop are totally different between the two games. Craig needs to take off his tinfoil hat, he's doing too much. He also lets us know that he only caught 21 Pokemon at the time of his review, so either he's really bad at pinball, or he only played for a few hours, because I was definitely able to snag over 21. Craig did say that he liked the bonus stages in the game, even though he had to admit that Pokemon Pinball had one more bonus stage than Kirby. I bet that was really hard for him. We'll say goodbye to Craig for now and move on to our next reviewer, Cameron! Cameron wrote a review for Pokemon Pinball in April of 2000 for GameSpot. Here we can see that Cameron may be more familiar with pinball than any of the rest of us here. He informs us that he's disappointed that the game doesn't have a multi-ball mode and that the physics were wrong. He didn't like that you were able to save basically any ball using the shake function. I have to disagree. As someone who is really bad at pinball, I really appreciated this. It meant that my games wouldn't end in 0.2 seconds if I made a mistake. But I can definitely agree that the ball didn't feel like it had much weight or speed when it was shot up the board, and it sank like a lead brick on the way back down. There were lots of times when I put my paddles in defense mode, and the ball would just shoot between them. Cameron was also disappointed with the Rumble Pack functionality. He said that it was a waste of plastic and a AAA battery. Honestly, I think I can agree with that. I played for a bit using an emulator on my phone that is able to utilize the rumble function, and it was so annoying that I just turned it off. Despite all of these flaws though, Cameron still ended up recommending the game, saying that it is one of the best pinball games for the Game Boy Color. Alright, we see what's wrong with the game. Was anything done to fix it though? Well, there's not been an official remaster, but a group called Rainbow Devs has made a hack called Pokemon Pinball Generations. The ROM hack was originally released in 2019, but there was an update for it in December of 2023. There isn't much information given about the changes made. The website highlights 60 FPS gameplay and adding in all Neos. I guess that might be referring to the Neo Genesis expansion of the trading card game, which would be talking about Gen 2 Pokemon, but if I'm wrong, feel free to correct me down below. I think the most impactful change of this hack is the addition of 2 new boards to the game. The gold board is a reskin of the red board, and the Pokemon featured on the board are from Gen 2. The same can be said about the silver board, which is a reskin of the blue board. Even though they're reskins, I don't think this is a cop-out by any means. The design choices are carefully thought out. I love the sentrets and the furrets on the side of the gold board, and I think that was my favorite part. So while it doesn't change up the gameplay loop all that much, having different Pokemon to catch and new places to travel to sets the hack apart from the original. One of the other claims this ROM makes is that the FPS have been increased to 60 to minimize lag. I have to admit that I don't normally have a keen eye when it comes to FPS differences and stuff, unless it's really bad. So I can't say if there's an improvement in performance, but I'll put a clip up here that shows the red board on both the original and the new version, so you can see if you notice anything. I do have to admit that I enjoy Generations more than the original because there are more Pokemon, and I like being able to choose between 4 boards instead of 2. I don't know much of anything about modding Pokemon games, so I don't know the limitations of what's possible, but if I had to say anything, I wish they would have been able to change the ball physics and the screen scroll. Now, 4 years later in 2003, Nintendo introduced another pinball game to the Pokemon lineup. Pokemon Pinball Ruby and Sapphire was released for the Game Boy Advance. You're able to catch all the Pokemon in the Hoenn Pokédex, minus Deoxys. There are 2 boards just like the original, one called Ruby and the other called Sapphire. The gameplay loop is pretty similar to the original, where you use the elements on the board to rack up points and enter catch and evolve mode. There are also new mechanics, like a Pokemart to purchase boosters, a hut where Cyndaquil will hatch eggs, and new Pokemon to interact with on the board, like Nuzleaf and Wishcash. My favorite part about the sequel is that it greatly improves the physics. I don't have too much experience with pinball, but I wasn't extremely frustrated when playing. I felt like I was able to execute the moves I wanted to, I was able to aim and have the ball going where I intended for it to go. It does gain and lose speed in a somewhat realistic way, I think. Aiming may have also been easier because the camera follows the ball instead of shifting the board, which takes away from the eye strain I experienced in the first game. When playing Ruby and Sapphire Pinball, I didn't find myself getting bored while I was playing. There were more than enough things to do on the 2 boards, between 4 different minigames and hatching and catching all the different Pokemon. I was able to play 15 to 20 minute matches, and I would continue to play for hours. So let's see what the reviewers at the time thought about this newfangled pinball game. Let's head back to Nintendo Power and get the boys back together again. Oh no! Who are George and Steven? Not you, Sweaty Steve, get out of here. Where are Eric, Andy, and Henry? And on this really blurry part, we can see Alan, George, and Jessica. And wait, Scott? Scott, what happened to the boys? Scott gives us a lukewarm review and says that it's a very solid game, and then proceeds to give it a 4 out of 5. Steven is pulling out his thesaurus when he says, Pokemon ecosystems are cleverly built into table designs, and that Pokemaniacs will be mesmerized. Calm down on the SAT words, Steven, this isn't a competition. He gave the game a 5 out of 5. And George tells us that he hasn't had as much fun with video pinball since Pinball of the Dead. Looking up that game was a mistake. This human head is disturbing and the colors are nasty. George, blink twice if you need help. Overall, Nintendo Power gave it a solid 4.5 out of 5, which is better than their 7.4 for the original. I also saw that my longtime friend Craig wrote a review on this game too. I wonder if he's gotten over his bias towards the pink blob. Yep. He wrote like a small essay. It seems like we're taking the saying little with too many words approach. Craig tells us that he thinks the physics are greatly improved from the original, and that the pinball boards are well designed. Alright, cool. He then goes on about how the cartridge save RAM keeps track of which creatures have been caught by the player in what's known as the Pokedex. Hey Craig, that was something done in the original too. Like we talked about earlier, it was surprising the Game Boy Color version shipped with the PCB that enabled saving. See, now I'm really questioning if Craig even played the original. He did end up giving Ruby and Sapphire an 8.8, so I guess he liked this version a bit more than the Game Boy Color version. Well, unlike Craig, I definitely played over 10 hours between both of these games. Being the pinball noob I am, I feel that Ruby and Sapphire is my favorite, if not only because of the ball physics. While there were distinct visual upgrades made between Generations and Ruby and Sapphire, I would prefer Generations. I just wish someone could adjust the ball physics at a minimum and maybe change the way the screen moves between the top and bottom of the board. That would probably require a rebuild of the entire game, but I can dream. I saw someone on the Poke community forums make a post in 2010 talking about how they wanted to make a hack that included Gen 4 Pokemon, and I wish that had come through. But at this point, I don't think anyone really cares enough about pinball to put in the effort to make another sequel. But if that were to be the case, I'd be all over it so fast. So, this has been my underqualified TED Talk about Pokemon Pinball. What did you think? I told you it wouldn't be so bad. I really liked making a video about something that isn't talked about too often, because even though the series is old, I think that the gameplay somehow still holds up today. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed me and my content, I just ask that you consider giving me a like and subscribing to my channel. I put a lot of effort into my videos, and your support lets me know I'm doing a good job. Don't forget, you're amazing, and I'll see you again next time. Okay, bye!